Shabbat Shalom. We have quite an exciting Torah portion as it begins. Ki Tavo el haaretz, when you enter into the land, there's a central ritual that one does. One brings their first fruits, and then they recite the following words. Aromi oved avi vayered mitzrayma. My father was a fugitive, wandering Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and very populous nation. It's a very interesting pasuk, a very interesting verse. In fact, if you study in the Talmud, what are the times that we are commanded to speak Hebrew? This is the central moment where Hebrew becomes a command. We have to recite these exact words. But what I want to ask everyone is, when do we see these words? Arami oved et avi. When do we see these over the course of the Jewish year? There's one time, other than when we read it in the Torah portion, that we hear these words. I think I heard Passover. I think I heard Haggadah. Yes and yes. Okay? And this is like a sort of a moment of truth because it takes place during the Maggid section, right after the 4 questions, the 4 children. We start to tell the story. And for some of us, this is where we start to skip over to the 10 plagues. And for some of us, it's when we start to really get into the story. But I'm not here to judge, especially this time of year. But it's interesting that when we're telling the Passover story in the Haggadah, wouldn't it make more sense for more verses to come from the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot? Why are these words chosen as a basis for the discussion of the Exodus from Egypt in the Haggadah? What do you think? Diana.
I think, like for me, in my mind, Deuteronomy, Devarim is like a retelling of the whole thing. So if you're going to be looking at a specific moment in time, it's important to look at what happened before that moment in time. So you had the Exodus. So how far back exactly are you going to go? Like we're not going to go all the way back to Bereshit because it wouldn't really make sense and it would just be too long.
Okay.
So you sort of go back to what led us to that whole situation where we had the opportunity, I think, for Yetziat Mitzrayim.
Okay. Let me just repeat for everyone who's following along at home that Diana is saying this comes from the book of Devarim because that's the purpose of Devarim. It's a book of retelling, Moses retelling, and at the Passover Seder, that's when we retell the story. So isn't it fitting that we draw from a retelling section of the Torah? Great. Why else? Why do we tell the Passover story through this text and not the actual story in Exodus? Anyone go? Oh boy. I just got new contacts, so I must admit I really can't see the back row. But it's like bifocals, I can see the text. So I'll share a couple of answers. One comes from Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, who is a rabbi in Efrat, and he shares the following answer. He says, one of the powerful aspects of how this text is framed is that it is in the second person singular imperative. It's talking to you. You, when you do this. And the mitzvah of retelling the story is something that we as individuals have to go through ourselves. We have to go through the Exodus story ourselves, and here we have a text that is speaking to the first person. Second answer that I'd like to share comes from Rabbi Avi Weiss. And I love this answer because too often we look at the Passover story as an Exodus story, but that's not the story in all of its, that's not the complete story. Yes, we begin as slaves. Yes, we leave Egypt, but that's not the whole story. After Egypt, we receive the Torah, we go through an incredible journey, and then we reach the land of Israel. And if you follow along in the Haggadah, You might be asking yourselves, why is this night so long? All right, we're free. Let's have our festive meal. But actually, the middle part of the Seder is the festive meal because, yes, you're free. Let's celebrate. And now, the rest of the Seder deals with the question of, now that our bellies are filled, now that we have this delicious meal, what are we going to do with this energy? What are we going to do as a free people? And it leads us to the end of the Haggadah. And you can see stepping stones. We do temple ritual Hallel, which is centered around Jerusalem and things like that. But the last part of the Haggadah, the last line that we say is Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim. Okay? So one part, to a certain extent, the Haggadah is a Zionist story, but it's also a story about what are you going to do with your freedom. We are B'nai Chorin, which is that we're a nation that's got freedom with a purpose. We're not Chofesh. We're not Chofesh, but we have to serve with purpose. So the fact that for Avi Weiss, we're taking this text, talks about how when we enter into the land of Israel, at the end of our journey, this is how we recall the Passover Seder, right? This is something that is done in the land of Israel. By the way, in the language of Israel, which sort of lends itself that Hebrew is actually a language of hope. So that's the second answer. I want to throw one more on you, and I'm going to leave you with a question. This comes from Rabbi Daniel Silber. Rabbi Daniel Silber points out that at this point in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, Moshe is not talking to the people who were actually slaves. As we know, if we've been following along the book of Numbers, the people of Israel are decimated. We start as a full people in the beginning of the book, and we end, all of the generation who lived as slaves, they are removed. And what remains are only the people who were born in the wilderness, who did not know slavery. So this is a ritual by someone, according to Rabbi David Silber, who really understands not only slavery, but understands the journey out of slavery. And he references that why did the previous generation, why did they not make it land of Israel? Because whereas they were physically free, mentally they couldn't leave that headspace of what they knew. And time again in the book of Numbers, the people of Israel talk about what it would be like to go back to the land of Egypt, the land that they knew. And only those who are removed of that burden can truly appreciate the journey which is demonstrated in this ritual when someone born in the wilderness comes forward and says, yes, I was once a slave, speaking many ways metaphorically, and now I am free. And I link myself to this history, and I bring first fruits from this land of Israel, which is part of the end of the journey. So I want to leave with this question. For Rabbi David Silber, he talks about what it means to be the next generation after slavery, after a generation or many generations of oppression. And in our day and age, we're going through a major transition of being a people linked to tragedy and oppression, fill in there the Holocaust, to a people that will become one without any survivors of that horrible time period of Jewish history. And what does that mean for us? How many of us draw comfort and an understanding of our Judaism because that we are preserving or we are living through and make sure that that time of oppression does not exist? And how many of us are ready, when we no longer have survivors, to do what this verse is commanding us? To come forward with first fruits, link ourselves to Egypt, and commit ourselves to the Jewish future. This, I think, is the central challenge that we face. I want you to think about what that means to you. And as we go through the Torah portion, there's a couple of signs of hope. We're going to have two afrufs this morning, two families that come together with the promise of a Jewish home and a Jewish future. And we're going to hear from someone who went to the land of Israel as a representative of our congregation, and they are going to share their story. I hope, as a result, you'll be filled with a sense of hope for the Jewish tomorrow, but at the same time, are you committed to this promise, or do we feel we have challenges that we have to deal with as we move forward? Something to think about as we enter our Torah portion. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Yeshua Rabbi Earne.